The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your hosts, Dr. Dean Bertram and Jen Durrell.
Well, top of the evening to you. Sound Irish?
Kind of.
Is there a top of the evening or is it just a top of the morning?
Well, you can say both.
Okay, well, there you
Right?
go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure I got a little Irish in me somewhere. My stepfather, actually, if he's watching, he's Irish. Hey, Alan. I'm sure he knows all the old tales from the old world. Or what do you call that? What do you call the home country? What do they call that? When you're from somewhere else, when you're an immigrant, you call it there's a word for it. It's not the home. It's not the homeland, but it's the old country, I guess. The old country.
Okay.
How are you doing?
I don't know.
Patrick's Day?
I'm no help.
Did you have a good St. Patrick's Day?
Yeah, it was pretty busy. So now I'm relaxing and have my drink, so I'm good.
Wow, that's good. Mine's been pretty busy as well. And thankfully, we have with us tonight a guest who's been on before, so I'm sure she'll regale us with the type of wonderful tales that only she's capable of regaling us with, and that'll let us relax and zone out of this, what's been a rather hectic St. Patrick's Day so far.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So without me blathering anymore, I know I'd rather hear, I'm sure you'd rather hear,
Yes.
I bet our audience would rather hear as well. Our guest tonight, she's also the co-host of T's Weird Week podcast, and she's an incredible spinner of tales and of all things supernatural and weird and strange, and perhaps the most entertaining storyteller I've ever listened to. So without any further ado, let's bring on Heidi Erickson.
Hi.
That was such a good introduction. I don't know if I'm ready to live up to it just yet. Hold on.
Oh, you will be now after you've had that
Yeah.
drink.
There we go. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Happy St.
Friends.
Patty's Day.
Well, happy you love it.
Mhm.
Do you celebrate St. Patrick's Day in Australia, Dean? Is that
Yeah.
a thing that happens?
Yeah, any excuse to get drunk in Australia usually. So there's an there's an old section of Sydney called the Rocks, and it's the original district which was built, I guess, by the first colonists or first fleet, and it's got,
Sure.
all these wonderful old bars, the oldest bars in Australia. And I think on St. Patrick's Day, that type of, I mean, all of Australia's probably lit up, but that area can be quite the fun St. Paddy's Day where everybody's drinking like green beer and the like. So
Sure.
Mhm.
yeah, that's. But I don't know that much to be honest, about the holiday and about those old country traditions. As I mentioned, my stepfather's from there, so he probably could tell us much more. But I bet you can just load us up with all kinds of good St. Paddy Day stories or Emerald Isle stories.
There's so I'm gonna get into, I was super ready. I missed you guys. I do. It's been ages. It's been years. And I was so ready to come on here. We're going to do a special St. Patrick's Day situation. I was just going to tell some stories about Tinkerbell straight up murdering motherfuckers. And that was going to be the whole thing. It was going to be soups entertaining and very fun. But I was like, what I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to, you ever just have a random question cross your mind and say, you go onto the interwebs to, search out the information, just to satisfy your curiosity. And the next thing you know, it's 4:00 in the goddamn morning. You're emailing some professor in Dublin. It's all gotten way out of control. Your family's worried about you. It got really intense because I was really ready to just tell these cute little fairy stories, but I forgot all about the aliens and the Anunnaki and all this other wacky shit that's all connected to fairies and things. And I was like, this is going to be a long podcast. Talk about all of it. And also drinking, because that's also a thing that I famously do quite well and quite often. And then Jen was all like, I made a tropical leprechaun.
Yes.
What is
Ah,
what is in the tropical
what's in it?
leprechaun?
It's the Malibu coconut rum and this
Sure.
blue. Actually, I have it right here. I
The
can't
blue
pronounce it.
curacao. The
Yeah,
curacao. Okay.
yeah, that and pineapple. So
Oh, perfect. Oh, I
that's it.
like that. A
It's
good
easy.
cocktail should be 4 ingredients or less. That's my main thing with ingredients and cocktails and stuff. I was very committed to, like, I don't typically celebrate St. Patrick's Day because I was a bartender for so long, and bartenders don't celebrate St. Patrick's Day. We just survive it. So,
Mhm.
like, that's just what we do. Also, like, I spent a period of time in a college town in Wisconsin, which means I have fished too many co-eds out of my hydrangea bushes the day after St. Patrick's Day to
Yeah.
really appreciate and enjoy the holiday the way that some people do. But I do typically tip a pint back for my great uncle George, who was like the patriarch of our family, and a right fine Irishman if ever there was one, a great teller of tales, and the same 3 terrible jokes at every single family holiday and funeral. Bless him, may he rest in peace. Fantastic. Yeah, so we're drinking here in Milwaukee. Milwaukee is predominantly, like, there's a lot of Irish floating around in Milwaukee. I think that the 3 big ethnicities that make up Milwaukee, or did make it up in the original founding of the town, were the Italians, the Irish, and the Polish, which is an absolutely delightful salad. We have some very strange cuisine here, and we drink a lot. We don't try and dye the lake green like they do in Chicago, where they dye the whole. Have you ever seen the Green River in
really?
Chicago?
No.
The whole river. They
Ah.
dye it green. Yeah,
Good
it's super
grief.
safe and environmentally friendly and not toxic in any way, shape, or form. They dye it like crayon green, leprechaun piss green, and it is just hideous. And then they just proceed to have a row, the likes of which you never did see in your whole life. I'm almost proud of them, though I'm from Milwaukee, so I'm not allowed to actually like anything about Chicago, or they would run me out of town on a rail for sure. But they do have some Irishes there. I'd also like to point out that when I said I was going to do a show about the Fae, I was only half serious. It's actually Dean's fault, because when I brought it up with Dean, I was like, hey, Dean, what if we let's talk about the fairies and stuff. And Dean was like, oh, I don't know if that's a good idea. I try to stay on the erstwhile side of the fair folk. And I was like, Dean, they ain't even got fairies in Australia, do they? Hardly. Giant spiders and snakes and shit. They got fairies there too. Turns out they do have fairies in Australia. I looked them up.
I forgot that conversation. We did have that, though. Was that the last time we had you on after the show? And I was like, be careful about the Fae. Yeah, I
Yeah,
forgot.
we talked about it.
Yeah, it's true, though. I think hence why they're called the fairy or the fair folk or the gentry, because you do have to be careful what you say about them.
You do. And like I was considering, like, maybe, because I'm not trying to piss anybody off either. Like, that's not necessary. I mean, now in the year of our Lord 20 and 21, I want to start talking shit about the fairies. I don't think so.
Sorry, you go, Heidi. I apologize.
I was just saying that, like, when I brought it up and you were clearly a little bit uncomfortable, I was like, well, now we have to.
Yeah, of course. And I was probably I always make that joke about, I always make that reference. You got to be careful what you say, because I like it. It harkens back to older traditions when these things were taken more seriously than just, as you were joking before, about a Tinkerbell. So there's something appealing, and I almost feel like I'm wiring myself into an older tradition. But speaking about fairies, and then I'll shut up because I'm more interested in hearing what you have to say. Speaking about fairies and the strange year of 2020 and older, perhaps pagan beliefs, I teased Greg Newkirk very early on when the pandemic broke out, because just prior to us having COVID, the series Hellier, particularly the second season, and we played it at Midwest Weird Fest, not the season that just was a week ago, but the week before, there's this big moment where they do this massive ritual to Pan in a cave. And then when I was watching that episode myself on TV before they'd submitted it to the festival, I was very conscious. I was watching and hearing a real-time Pan ritual play out. And I'm a little bit superstitious about such things. So I turned it off, as I told Greg and I told the director, Carl Pfeiffer.
Yeah.
And I didn't watch it all at once because I thought I'm not gonna have a ritual play out in my living room that I don't know what it is. But then I teased Greg when COVID was still kind of funny in the very early days. I said,
It's still
I
funny.
said, what did you guys do? Because it's from the root word pan and pandemic and panic is all the same. I'm like, I'd actually talked about it at the festival. This is when you did this on TV, it was broadcasting in probably thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of living rooms and computer screens all around the world. And I'm like, maybe some older ritual to pan is the reason we're in the middle of the first real pandemic of my lifetime. But anyway, so that's my point. Sometimes you've got to be careful with those older traditions. You never know what might come of it.
You do. You can't just be having rituals to old gods in your living room if you don't have like snacks or whatever. You should definitely be a good host for. I would like to point out that as far as like the causes of the coronavirus, the odds that it was Pan are very, very small, as Pan was the god of revelry and drinking and having fun. If he was the god of day drinking, that would make sense, I guess, because there was a lot of that going around. But here's a fun fact that maybe you don't know, is that the Catholic Church, they have all these saints, right? Like they're just lousy with saints. They got coming out of their asses. Like St. Patrick, who we're celebrating today. They also have a saint. The saint's name is Corona. Saint Corona. Guess what Saint Corona is the saint of?
Drinking.
I wish. He's the patron saint of people living through pandemics, of people living through plagues.
Oh, really?
I swear to you, that really happened. They actually brought out this great big beautiful old icon that was an icon to Saint Corona right when the plague was going through Europe. They have it at the Vatican. It's this great big gilded castle thing that they brought out of one of the rooms full of great big golden shit that they have at the Vatican or whatever to Saint Corona to pray to her. And I was like, that's a little bit of the cart after the horse there, you guys, but like whatever.
Yeah.
Thanks. Nice work. I don't know. That's great. So it probably wasn't Pan. It wasn't his fault. I don't believe that for a second. It doesn't seem like it's not his deal. It's not the thing he would do. St. Patrick. Okay, here we go. Let's talk about it, you guys, because it's going to get fucking weird. And like, I don't even know how we're going to get from here to there before midnight, but I'm going to figure it out. St. Patrick was, and are you Catholic? Are either of you Catholic?
Nope.
No, you're not Catholic. He's a bastard. He's a bastardly person. They say he drove the snakes out of Ireland, but there was never not one single snake in Ireland, you guys. It was literally an iceberg until it broke off from the European continent. There were no reptiles there because it was too cold. And then it was an island and no snakes swam across the English Channel to get onto it. The snakes that they are referencing are the people who already lived in Ireland, and they were pagan. Pagan just means country. It means country folk. They were making fun of them. They're calling them white trash. Anytime somebody says pagan, that's what they're saying, country people. And they had these animistic spiritual beliefs, their tribal beliefs, that were not jiving. They were like not vibing with Catholicism at all. The Pope was like, I do not vibe with that. And so St. Patrick came to Ireland. And he, like, not to put too fine a point on it, he just up and like straight up murdered some people, just like until they were gone. Those were the snakes he drove out of Ireland. Here's the thing. One of the big beliefs that they had in Ireland before St. Patrick came along and just, drove everybody into the sea, because that's literally what he did. He drove them into the sea, was about the Tuatha De Danann. The Tuatha De Danann were the people who lived beneath the hill. That's what it means. It means the people who live beneath the hill. It means the followers of the people of the goddess Danu. Fun fact, nobody knows where Irish people came from. They just don't. They know where some of the people who like eventually conquered the Irish Isles came from. And they know about the Manx people, and they know about the Vikings that came there, and they know about the English people, like the Anglo-Saxons who eventually came there. But the original people who were originally said to have inhabited the Irish Isles, nobody knows where these people came from. They have no idea. And their beliefs and their stories and their myths still exist in fragments, but the people are gone, and those myths are unique in all the world. They don't exist anywhere else. So it's not like they're like a mutated version of stories that came from some other place. They're just, nobody knows where they came from. There are people who have dedicated their entire lives to trying to piece together all of the different myths and stories of the original people of Ireland, which is why this is a whole big freaking deal. Right? We're already getting in there, you guys. I gotta slow my roll.
No, that's fascinating. I didn't know that there was that disconnect between the original natives of Ireland and the other, I guess, myths and cultures of the world. I'd never heard that before.
Yeah, it's insane and crazy. It's like super a lot. And one of the reasons is, okay, you guys are UFO people. You guys are alien enthusiasts. You're interested in this kind of concept. Have you heard before of the Anunnaki? Do you know what this story is about, who these people are? Like,
I mean, I'm aware of it to some degree, but you can still tell the story.
So hypothetically, if you were the kind of person who was into this kind of idea that the planet Earth, such as it is, was like seeded from outer space by alien beings, and before that there was just dinosaurs and like giant sloths or whatever, and then like these people came down in fucking spaceships, and boom, pow, fuck, I don't know, like algebra. I'm not real clear on the science. That's what happened. Then you look back at like a lot of the myths of like ancient peoples back when we were still essentially just monkeys who like were good at killing stuff because we had spears. Then all these stories kind of fit together, and one of these stories from way back, like pre-Sumerian, like Zoroastrian, like peoples, was the Anunnaki. It was the stories of these people who like had big ass wings and like essentially came down from the sky and taught us everything that there was about being like a person and not just a monkey in a loincloth. Agriculture and language and like all this stuff we learned from the Anunnaki. And if you're a person who believes in this panspermia idea that aliens like brought essentially being human to the planet, then this is a metaphor for these people with advanced technologies that came to the planet Earth. Right? This is
Zechariah Sitchin stuff really is.
Yeah,
exactly. He's the one who popularized it, I think, the most.
This is still about fairies, by the way. We're still talking about fairies. So, the Anunnaki did all this stuff and what have you. Like if you were a person who was super Christian, especially if you were Catholic, because the Catholic are the most magical of all Christians. God bless them, Lord keep them. Then you might have said that what happened vis-a-vis the Bible, and I'm like old school Bible, deep tracks, the fucking Silmarillion of the Christian shit, like way back in the day, was that Lucifer, right, who is the devil, he was cast down out of heaven because one day he goes to God and he's like, screw you, dad, or whatever, and like they get into a big fight. And then there's a war in heaven because there's angels that are kicking it with Lucifer, and there's angels that are still kicking it with Dad, and like chaos ensues, shenanigans, all this foolishness. At the end of that, right, because Lucifer too was supposed to be the light bringer. He was this character who was supposed to have like been this horrible evil creature who also like taught us how to make fire and like all that. He gave us all that knowledge, the civilizing knowledge. That's why he was called Lucifer, the morning star, the light bringer, knowledge guy. At some point, according to Irish myth and legend, the Catholic Church said in Ireland that what had happened was there was this war in heaven, and St. Michael goes to God and says, God's pissed, like super duper mad. God's throwing everybody out of heaven. Get out of the pool, he says. Screw all you kids. St. Michael's like, whoa, Dad, like, relax. Don't kick everybody out. That's crazy. Then you won't have any angels left, and that would be the worst. Maybe we can keep some of them here or whatever. And God was like, fine, look, fine. I tell you what, wherever the angels who have left heaven are, wherever they are, whether they're already on earth or they're still falling, like still in the process of falling. If they're on earth, they stay on earth. If they're still falling, they stay in the air, and that's where they stay. If on Judgment Day, these angels, these fallen angels, have enough blood in their body to write their names with, then on Judgment Day, on that day, then they can come back into the kingdom of heaven.
Huh.
Right? Except, fun fact, spoiler, angels ain't got no blood, you guys. It's one of those things they ain't got. Wings, yes. Halos, yes. Blood, nah. So that's why they say, because in this story, the Irish are believing that the Fae, the Tuatha De Danann that they had believed in for thousands of years, now, according to the Catholic Church, are these demons, these fallen angels, that they steal people. They steal people because they need blood
Huh.
to get back into heaven on Judgment Day.
Wow, it's like a vampiric fallen angel story.
Right? It's a twisted web we weave over in Ireland, guys. That's why these people drink. That shit is crazy. Like, that's crazy. What's going on? So that's one of the hypothetical possibilities about, and one of the ways that the Fae, that's Tuatha De Danann, the gentry, the wee folk they see, are connected to this idea of like these beings, these super intelligent beings who gave human beings like this magical like ability to be people. That's just one of the ways. Now, the pagans who were in Ireland, I think this is one of the reasons that like Irish people are one of the last European peoples, because they were on an island, that kind of relinquished their like tribal and animistic ways. So like people on the mainland of Europe, for example, they accepted Christianity way before the Irish people did. And as a result, they're way more connected to those old stories, to those old traditions, because they're this separate people that exists on this island. And for them, the Fae, before the Catholic Church ever, before St. Patrick ever showed up, trying to chase his snakes all hither and thither, they believed that the Fae were a lot of different things. They were nature spirits. So like they were the spirits of the land, of like the mountains and the rivers and the lakes. They especially like to hang out at places where fresh water was, or any place beautiful, any place natural and beautiful. They also believed that they were the spirits of the unpure, unclean, the restless dead. That was a thing. In fact, the hills that are like the places where fairies are supposed to live, right, are burial mounds. So when people say they've been taken away to this fairy land, like to the land of the fairies or whatever, which happens all the time, it came to be associated with also the underworlds and later with hell. So like these people went to these, like got stolen away to hell or whatever. So there's a very complicated feeling with the Fae in Ireland. Now the Fae exist all over the world, as we've already said. Like in Romania, they're called El Il, and they're very scary creatures that live in the forests. In Australia, they're called Mimi. Like the Aboriginal people there call them like Mimis. But did you ever hear about the Mimis?
Yeah.
Yeah, did you? Was that like a thing people ever talked about? I'd never heard
I
of the
don't think
Mimi
it's a
before.
big thing, but I've heard within, cultural comparisons, the term. It's not something that Australians usually sit around and talk about the way that we might talk about fairies or a better known term. So, but I had heard of it in passing. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's because they exist essentially in every single culture, because the word fairy comes from the Old French, which is fée, which just meant a woman usually that knew the names of all of the plants and all of the animals and was a healer. It was a person who was mystical. And then in the Old English, it became fea, which just meant like enchanted. That's all that it meant. It doesn't come from Germanic, though, which is interesting because most of the English language comes from Germanic. But in Germanic, fey means like doomed to die. And they used to think that those words were not related at all. But it turns out that those languages crossed at approximately the same time. So it might actually be that they do come from the same place, except German fairies will fuck you up. And so if you were talking about German fairies, they were gonna come for you. They were gonna rearrange your shit. They were gonna re-engineer your car, and also you were gonna super die. It was gonna be very efficient, and they were gonna mess you up. Sorry, bye. 9 yacht. So like that was a super thing. So this is life in Ireland. You have, if you're talking about like the different parts of the country, because fairies are different all over the world, and they're different in different parts of the British Isles too, and of Ireland. Irish fairies aren't good or bad. They're just like these super powerful things that exist all the time. And PS might also be like scary, vengeful dead people, or maybe land spirits, or maybe your ancestors, like these creatures, these people, this culture that had been there for a million years. If you go to Scotland, there are good fairies and there are bad fairies. There's the Seelie Court and the Unseelie Court. And the Seelie Court is like, they're fairies, and like they'll still mess with you because they don't care. They think that they're better than us, and they're probably right. And they'll definitely like tie your shoelaces together, and you'll fall down the stairs and they'll laugh. They're going to be tricksy. They're going to like try and get you into deals that you don't actually want to be in, that kind of thing. But mostly the Seelie Court, they're not specifically like trying to like mess with you. The Unseelie Court, on the other hand, actively hate our asses and seriously can't wait to just ruin our lives all the time. The Seelie Court became associated with this idea of fae being demonic creatures. So it's said that the Unseelies, like a banshee, you know what a banshee is, right? Super screaming, someone's gonna die, floating in the sky, long hair, skeleton face, like horrible sound, like echoing throughout the moors. Not a good time. Such a drag at parties. Banshee, she was one of the Unseelie. They would come and steal your babies or your bride or whatever as a tithe to hell. Because technically speaking, as fallen angels, they served Satan, and they needed to, like, I don't know, pay their unholy taxes or whatever with your fucking baby. So watch out for that. In Ireland, it wasn't quite like that, but the idea of paying a hell tithe was still a thing that would happen. The point is that you were definitely scared, and people are still scared. I would like to make this very clear. In Ireland, people are still scared of being kidnapped by fairies. That's real life. Every day, all day long. I was just talking on the Weird Week podcast about a guy in Ireland right now who actually is making a small fortune by farming out his services to people in other countries because he has fairies on his farm. There's a fairy portal on his farm because there's a field where the black thorn and the white thorn meet. And apparently that's where they hang out and they have drinks and like, I don't know, play punk shows or do whatever. They're like getting down. That's how fairies be. And he like gets paid to help fix people's land, like when their farms aren't working and their animals are not healthy or whatever, because there's a good possibility that those people have just removed the wrong tree or upended a boulder or filled in a creek or done something else that has pissed off the fairies on their land. And because this guy is like simpatico with the Shia, whatever, they call him up from fucking Bulgaria, and he goes there and he tells them what to do to make it so the fairies aren't pissed off anymore. So this is very much still a real life, real thing. Right? That's still really happening.
Absolutely. And I think I think I've heard stories, I don't know if it was in Iceland or Greenland or somewhere like that, where they'll divert roads around fairy trees, or, you know, they'll actually go out of their way not to disturb a fairy mound, because there still is this, this cultural belief still hangs heavily even over modern society.
Yeah, absolutely. And they do in Ireland too. They'll absolutely reroute roads about it. And definitely Iceland. I think Iceland is one of those places too, though, that's like kind of isolated in its own weird, strange place. And it's like really easy to believe. Like, it's like Gary, Indiana. You ever been to Gary, Indiana? A fucking weird place. It's like you're not even in America at all. You're in Gary, fucking Indiana. And I feel like Iceland is probably the same way. You can believe almost anything goes on there because it's so creepy and weird. Anyway, so this is still real life. Part of the reason that this is still real life is because, do you guys remember the 80s at all?
Yeah.
Yeah. Come on.
Yeah.
I know you had that Lisa Frank binder, Jen. Don't lie to me. Come on.
I actually remember those. Oh my God. I probably did.
Yeah, you got it. All the cool girls had the Lisa Frank binder. If you weren't there during the 80s, it was great. It was a great time. It was what? Michael J. Fox, like the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was fucking fantastic. Good stuff. One of the other things that happened in the 80s was this little phenomenon caused by a book called Communion. You remember that book, Communion?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. I have it.
I forget who wrote that book. My mother would kill me. She was obsessed.
Whitley Strieber.
What?
Was it? I know. This was really the resurgence, though, in America of this idea of alien abductions, and it was a big fucking deal, you guys. Everybody was obsessed with it. Like, it was. I was just a kid at the time, and I remember, like, all of a sudden, Unsolved Mysteries. You had Robert Stack in his fucking trench coat talking about people. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was happening. Like, people suddenly wanted to talk about Area 51, and people wanted to talk about the fire in the sky. And when the story first came in, because that only happened in like 78 or 79, it was a whole big thing. Everybody was getting abducted by aliens, and everybody was talking about the gray aliens, like big-eyed classic, like pop culture aliens. When this started to happen in the 80s, people who had been studying Irish folk mythology for a super long time tried to say that alien abductions couldn't possibly be a real thing, that it was just a mass hallucination, a cultural hallucination based maybe even on something that had happened in humanity's deep, dark past that we all shared a common memory of, because the stories of alien abduction sound exactly like the stories that people in Ireland had been telling for centuries about what it was like to be carried away by the fairies. Exactly the same, including the lights in the sky, including periods of missing time, including memories that didn't make any sense, scars and marks they had no explanation for, all that shit. And including this idea of these creatures who were small and pale and seemed to speak to each other telepathically and things of that nature, of being like frozen and paralyzed in your bed and knowing that something was going on and being unable to move. All of that is completely identical to the idea of being taken away by the fairies. And it was the exact same experience that was described in the book Communion. So you had the people on the one side who were like, well, this obviously means that can't be true, because if you believe that's true, then you must believe in fairies. Fucking professional skeptics. Those guys can wash my socks. Other people, on the other hand, people who I'd much rather get a drink with, thank you very much, were like, what if it's the other way, actually? What if the other way is that actually maybe when people have been talking about being abducted by fairies for centuries and centuries and centuries, before time out of mind, before there was a single road that ever led to Rome, what if that was a really real thing that was happening? But what if fairies are just what they called extraterrestrials? And it began this whole entire gigantic school of thought where people were like, what about the Anunnaki? What about these weird pyramids we found? What about this? What about that? What about the other thing? So now in Ireland right now, I wish there was an Irish person here that I guarantee, like in every pub in Ireland at some point in time, someone has sat down and had a conversation about whether or not their great-great-granny was carried off by the fairy or was abducted by fucking little aliens. And I can't believe I've never sat in on that conversation. I'm so mad about it, you guys. Fuck,
we had some abductees at Midwest Weird Fest if you'd come.
Did you now? Oh, I wish I could have made it. Oh, I wish I could have done.
But I think that's very telling. I think that tale is as entertaining as it is. I think you're dead on the money. I think that you can't look at the alien abduction phenomenon without looking at that older historical precedent, because the commonalities, as you said, are so striking. And I think it's
Yeah.
only that we live in the post-space age or the space age that we tend to want to wrap that abduction experience within the context of extraterrestrial space people. I think I think it's culturally bound in that manner, but I think the rest of it, I think you're dead on. I think it's a phenomenon which has been going on for a very long time.
Right, exactly. And especially because this idea, as I said, of these fairy peoples exists in every culture in the world. Not just the idea that there are these tiny, like, people who can do magical things and will sour your milk and steal your bebes, but like this idea of being like abducted, of being pulled away from wherever you are into this strange other place where things will happen to you, whether you want them to or not, and you're kind of entranced, you're bewitched, right? And sometimes people come back with strange stories, and sometimes people don't come back at all. Because that's
I think
a real
that's a
thing.
lot of the
Yeah.
David Paulides missing 411 stuff. I think if you're familiar with a lot of that, I think that might
100%.
tie more into this older tradition than a lot of people acknowledge, actually.
Absolutely. And there are people too who are Sasquatch researchers. And like, I think what a fascinating bunch of motherfuckers those guys are. There are people there, especially people who study like the stories of indigenous people as far as Sasquatch go, who are like, these are a form of extraplanar beings. These are not just like big ass monkeys that live in Canada. These are like creatures who can manipulate space-time in a way that we can't, because otherwise it wouldn't be possible for them to exist the way that they are. And then there's Zorth. You guys ever kick it with the Zorth crowd? Jeez. No, they don't get it.
I don't know. I don't know this.
Yeah, I don't think I do that either.
Zorth is a telepathic Bigfoot who is the CEO of the Council of Bigfoots. Oh, that's not even the weird part. He's the CEO of the Council of Bigfoots. He communicates pretty much exclusively with this one character who believes deeply in the QAnon theory. That's his whole thing. And he knows for a fact that the QAnon is real and true, because despite I'm sure what he feels is overwhelming technicolor evidence of this vast conspiracy, Zorth has in fact assured him that it is true.
I need to get Zorth on this show. Can somebody
Right?
channel Zorth for me?
Dude, listen, like twice a day, I'm like, somebody find Zorth's people. Like, I don't care what it costs. Get that fucking guy in here immediately. Oh, man. Yeah, so the idea is that, like, because Sasquatch and the Wild Man and Wazoo or whatever is part of like this indigenous person mythology, this idea of like people who already existed way before whoever we are as humans, whatever species we are, that they too might ultimately be fairies. Big, stinky, hairy fairies.
Well, there is that other cultural anthropologist idea, which I don't buy into, but that the prominence of fairy faith or the belief in the little people is actually some kind of cultural memory of a smaller tribe or a smaller people that used to somehow coexist with us before we either killed them all or they died out or whatever.
Sure. Well, I mean, like in the stories of the Tuatha De Danann of the sea, the people who came to Ireland did ultimately overwhelm them, and they were forced back to where they came from, which in the myth is beneath these hills is where the gateway is to their place. But the literal translation of those old stories doesn't say beneath the hills at all. It says they returned to the sky because they were sky people. Yeah. Sound familiar, you guys? Weird.
Yeah.
Is that interesting and strange?
That is interesting. And you're right. There's every culture from Native American Indians to tribes in Africa to the people you're talking about, or the whatever the people were in Ireland who had those beliefs, who do talk about sky people visiting and or returning. So that's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, the interesting thing about it is if you look at like if you're talking about like the Aboriginal peoples in Australia, for example, for them the star people came and they left, and one day they'll be back, and they can talk to those people in the dream time. Like it's possible for them to experience the like messages from them in the dream time. But for the Irish people, they're still there. They're omnipresent all the time because it's connected so strongly with this idea of the spirits that inhabit their land and everything on it. So like they've never left, and that power is still very much there for them. So yeah, that's a really real, like there's definitely places in Ireland right now. And this is also, I talk a lot about this because I have Native American heritage, because my mother is actually Indigenous and Irish. That's my right. What a crazy salad. They have that same thing where like there's places where like you just don't go, like you just don't go to there ever. Like no one ever has and no one ever should. And if you ask them why, the answer is because you don't go there. You just don't go there. Like, remember you guys ever read about the Dasyaptos Pass in Russia, where all those
Russia,
right, where all those hikers, like they found them outside their tents, like frozen with their mouths wide open, their tongues pulled out or whatever, and they were like, it was probably an avalanche. Sure thing, buddy.
Yeah.
Right. But the Dasyaptos, that pass in the native language, that word means don't go there. Literally, the mountain that pass is on is called Death Mountain. That's what the word means. So they went to Don't Go There Pass on Death Mountain, and then everybody was like, I don't know, like it snowed, I guess, a lot.
Didn't another group of hikers or explorers disappear there like in the last couple of weeks? I heard recently.
Oh, really? I didn't hear that.
I mean, it's not funny, it's tragic, but also it's Death Mountain. What are you doing? Go to Cancun, you fucking idiots. Like, why? Like,
there is that tradition where places you shouldn't go tend to sound like places you shouldn't go, like a Devil's Pass or a Devil's Lake, or
right?
or a Death Mountain or whatever. Yeah, they're not very. Why you would want to go there? I'm not sure.
On Death Mountain. Every time I think about it, I just shake my head. I'm like, I can't. Like, I want to feel bad because that's a tragic thing that happened, but at the same time, like, you guys, like, it's because they didn't listen to the people who live there, because the people who live there named that place, and they were like, there's Death Mountain, and they're like,
Yeah, there's still indigenous people there, I think, isn't there? There's an indigenous people who live in that area, right?
Yeah, there are, totally. It's weird, too, when you guys, I mean, if you think about it, there's still whole vast, giant areas of the planet where people just don't live. Most of humanity is concentrated on less than 15% of the land, like, that is land, not counting the ocean. We cluster up on the edges of oceans and rivers and shit, and most of the rest of the world is just trees and rocks and stuff like that. Even in America, because America is a great big freaking place. We have way too much of everything here, and land is no exception. Even like most of, like, Milwaukee is a fair-sized city that I live in, but if you drive more than 10 minutes in any direction, guess where you are? Nowhere, Chuck.
Yeah.
Nowhere. You walk off the road, and guess what? They're not going to find you. It's like not going to happen unless you happen to run into a quick trip, which is possible.
Yes.
They're everywhere too.
There's
more quick trips than Bigfoot, I think.
No, it's true. You just follow the smell of crullers and you'll be fine. But
you're not that far from Bray Road down there, right? Like Bray Road, we think of it as a rural area, but it's pretty much on top of Milwaukee.
It is, right? But like, yeah, that's what I'm saying though. Like, there's not, even if you go to Los Angeles and New York, Chicago, any of those places like that, you still only have to. You are never, ever, ever more than a half an hour really away from being in the middle of nowhere. Cities are an illusion; they aren't real. Like, that's not real. There's no civilization. There's just quick trips and nothing. That's it.
I mean, I like that. I don't know if I like the quick trips and nothing, but I like the idea that that we still can access that weirder primal non-inhabited areas. There's something alluring about the thought that what could be out there, just beyond the city lights.
Yeah, there are places in this state right now that the indigenous people will tell you we just don't go. There's a whole part of Wisconsin called the Driftless area up on the western side of the state, up where the Mississippi is, and there's whole big chunks of the Driftless area where we don't know what's under the ground because the whole thing is limestone and it's water running through it, right? And has been for since the last ice age. And so it is impossible with the scientific equipment that we currently have to accurately map what is underneath that area. We just know that it's vast and deep and electrically charged because there's mineral rich water running underneath it at great speeds at all times. That's all we know. And within that area of the Driftless, there are places where the tribes are like, don't fucking go there unless you never want to come back. We'll never see you again, and that's fine, but we're just letting you know not to do it. If you go, pack a lunch. It'll be a little like your last one, so make it tasty. Put some Fig Newtons in there or some shit. I don't know. Something you're going to enjoy. There's just whole places where it's you just don't go. And we build stuff on top of it. There is a place in Wisconsin called the Novitiate. Have you ever heard of the Novitiate?
No, I'd heard of the Driftless area, but I've never heard of the Novitiate.
The Novitiate, you guys, used to be a novitiate, like a monastery. It was a place where you sent monks who weren't monks yet, little baby monks, little school monks or whatever. It was like the first monastery in Wisconsin, the first official one that was recognized by the Catholic Church. It's up by a place called Gresham, which was once upon a time in a state park called Hyman Falls. It's not a state park anymore. The state sold it off. It's private land now. The Novitiate in Gresham is so fucking haunted. It was built on top of a place where the indigenous people, again, were like, you shouldn't build there. That's sacred land, and we don't build things there. Why would you build things there? That's where we take sick people and things like that and stuff we never want to see again. You're going to build a building there? Okay. They did. It went poorly. Ultimately, everybody was slaughtered or whatever. So that wasn't good. In the 70s, the tribe that was there, there was a bunch of people who took over the building and had a standoff with the FBI because they were like, this is our land and it's sacred land and you never should have built this here. And the FBI had a very nice negotiation with them and took them off to kidding. They killed everybody, died, blood on the floor. Terrible. It was a bloodbath. And then after that, of course, a bunch of people who just don't know anything about Satan at all went up there and were like, what's a great idea in this abandoned, haunted monk house that a bunch of people, we're just going to summon Satan all day. Demons can't wait. Great. Somebody order a pizza. So, of course, some asshole from Chicago, I'm serious, bought it after it had sat abandoned for 55 years. And we're like, we're going to turn this into a bed and breakfast.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Except it didn't happen. They had the piece of property for 12 years. And after 4 years, they stopped even trying. And then somebody else bought it. And they were also going to try and turn it into a bed and breakfast. And the same thing happened. They started work on their renovation. And after a period of time, they were like, actually, this is going to cost us way more money to renovate this than we initially thought. So, and they put it up for sale. Except what kind of sense does that make? Who buys a giant, ridiculous, ancient building in the middle of nowhere in the woods in Wisconsin and doesn't have somebody come out and give them estimates of what it's going to cost them to turn it into a bed and breakfast? They had to have known what it was going to cost before they got started.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Except all the contracting companies that they hired to do the work for them tell a very different story. They say that all of their equipment went missing, that they heard voices, that people got pushed off of ladders, that people would leave home from the work site and have horrible nightmares about their families being slaughtered. Just not fun or cool or good at all. And so the workmen wouldn't come back. After a while, they couldn't find anybody who was willing to do the work, and so they abandoned the project. Twice that's happened now. The Novitiate is still currently just a building that's owned by people who want to get rid of it because it's fucking haunted. They They told you not to build on that, but they told him not to.
Yeah.
They told him not to build on that property.
We should go
Yeah.
shoot a mini documentary out of that site. Has anyone
Oh, I'd
been
love-
there to do anything like that?
I've been there. It's a beautiful
Oh.
building. Well, of course I've been there. Come on now. Well, I used to go swimming right up the way, so I figured,
Oh.
why not? It's a beautiful building. I'm not going to hang out there after dark, probably. I mean, I would have to have a couple drinks for sure. I just think it's rude. I don't want to be rude to people.
Right.
I don't want to be rude, but it is. It's a beautiful building. It's a breathtaking building. It's a gorgeous piece of property. But like, yeah, it's haunted as balls. Bray Road is there. Witch Road is there. Boy Scout Road. There's a lot of roads, a lot of weird roads. Wisconsin is it's just crazy with the cheese whiz. It's everywhere.
It's Weirdsville,
It's
USA,
weird,
Wisconsin.
yes.
I've lived all over the world. This is the weirdest place I've ever lived in my life. That is a
I
real
always
life.
I always hear more and more weird things about it that I didn't even know.
Yeah,
Like
there's a lot.
But I can see Jen's eyes light up about investigating that location. I never heard of that before, Heidi.
Yeah, the novitiate. Check it out.
Yeah.
It's quite Gresham.
Great.
There's a bunch of them. I heard they're opening up Summerwind this summer too for tours and investigations. I've never been to Summerwind yet. I always wanted to go there. That'd be super fun to check out. We've
Where's
come a
that?
long way. Summerwind? You guys have never
Yeah.
heard of Summerwind? Oh,
Yeah.
oh man. It's like it's definitely like, I don't want to call it Disneyland. That's maybe a bit over the top. Maybe like a really nice mall. I don't know. It's someplace you want to go to. It's a famed mansion that burnt down like 3 times. You know what? I'll save the story of Summerwind for another time because we've already come
Okay.
so far from Ireland, you guys.
Yes, we
Like,
have. We talking about Wisconsin.
Well, that's the way of the Irish tale. It kind of rambles
Hey.
and travels. So
That's true. That's really true. I feel like I didn't even really tell a story. We were just talking about aliens and weirdness. It got real academic.
There were lots of tales in there. I
Yeah.
certainly enjoyed them. There's things I didn't know about that I know now. So that's always
Yeah.
Oh, that's
always
good.
good.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's good. I do like to be educational with this information. Lord knows I'd have just took it to my grave otherwise. Mm.
So
Anyway,
I'll
that's all I
ask-
got, you guys.
I'll ask you a quick question, Heidi. What
What's
do you think the fae or the fair folk or the fairies are? Do you just like to remain kind of, nonchalant and just to talk about it, or do you have a kind of interpretation that you think they might be this or they might be that?
The more that I like chase things down all these crazy rabbit holes and like study language, because I'm fascinated by the way that languages melt together. Like you can learn everything you need to know about people by looking at where their languages like cross each other and stories cross each other and like little bits of stories end up in other stories. It just seems more and more apparent to me that probably like the human civilization that exists on this planet right now is not the first developed civilization that's ever existed on this planet. It feels like there was a whole long past epoch of time that we don't know anything about. And if that's true, I mean, anything could have happened. Also, humans are kind of stupid. I don't know if you've noticed that about us. We're not extra bright. It's true. Like we are no other animal on the face of the earth is capable of looking at something right in front of their goddamn faces and being like, nah.
Yeah.
Dogs don't do that. Like, we're so stupid. We're the stupidest. And I gotta feel like at some point in time, somebody smarter than us was here, or it's just too depressing to not believe that.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're still underneath the hills in Ireland, but I mean, what do I know? I'm just a stupid monkey. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, you know about the shaver mystery, right?
The shaver mystery. Ooh, no.
Yeah.
Enlighten me. Tell me about it.
Now I'll tell a quick tale, but I won't be able to spin one as well as you, so I'll try to stick to the facts. Prior to the UFO or flying saucer mania of the 1940s,
Mhm.
there was something in the pulp magazines. I think it was Amazing Stories, whatever Ray Palmer's pulp was. It was
Sure,
one of
sure.
the most popular science fiction pulp magazines in the country. but he began to run stories from somebody called Richard Shaver. Richard Shaver was a welder who started to pick up messages through his welding equipment. Now, it's every possibility Richard Shaver was psychiatrically unwell, but what he started to hear was that there was an older civilization that lived under the earth, which he termed the Deros, which meant detrimental robots. There was also the Teros, which were the original good guys, but they'd left the planet. Anyway, the Deros, or Deros, however you pronounce it, abducted people, tortured people. He could hear people screaming. They had advanced spacefaring kind of craft. They were a super advanced civilization. So it was very much prototypical to UFO belief. The fascinating thing is when Ray Palmer started running these Richard Shaver stories, which many of which he probably ghost wrote, I think it was Amazing Stories. I hope I'm getting that right. Is that he got letters after letter after letter after letter from people saying, we've been in the cave, we've heard the Deros. Like, it became this big cultural thing. Absolutely. So when the UFO phenomenon first, or the flying saucer phenomenon first appeared in 1947 in the US, it was also Ray Palmer who did the most to popularize that mythology. And he also was able to say, well, this is a justification for the story of the Deros and the Teros and the Shaver mystery that I've been running over the past decade. So there is this long tradition that there's an older race than us that still might live here, perhaps subterraneously.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Dude, that's like the Autobots and the Decepticons. That's crazy awesome. I love it. Well, yeah, well, like, it's like stuff like, if you look at like the Perry Reese map, which is like one of my favorite obsessions ever, which is like, right, this map that had been pieced together in, like, I think it was the 1600s. I think that's correct.
Something like that.
That had been pieced together from apparently a bunch of maps that are way, way, way older than that showed the shoreline of Antarctica. But we had A, never been to Antarctica, and B, the shoreline was accurate in such a way that you only would have been able to see with satellite imaging, because it was the accurate shoreline of Antarctica underneath miles and miles of ice. And the last time that Antarctica could have been seen underneath all that ice would have been 1 million years ago. So where the fuck did that map come from? Right? How does that make any sense? How is that accidental? Like, that you can't, I mean, the universe is very complex. It's a very weird simulation. I believe it's possible that very absurd and ridiculous things happen all the time just because it's a super weird, crazy video game that we're living in. But there's some stuff you just cannot dismiss to like the randomness of chaos. Like, it's just not, like, I don't think that that's possible. And there have been stories of people, like subterranean cultures in a million different cultures too. The Navajo people, the Dine people believed that like their creators came from underneath the earth and above the earth, both at the same time, because the place from before, the beginning place, was both places. It was both above and below. There was like a doorway where both of those like levels crossed. A fascinating story. But yeah, I don't know. Probably fairies.
No, I do think that I don't know ultimately what a lot of this stuff is, to be honest, whether it's the Perry Reese map or whether it's fairies or whether it's the Shaver mystery or whether it's alien abductions. But I do think that the universe is far more complicated than science likes to box it. And I do think that these things, the way Charles Fort realized early on, is kind of gives us a looking glass into a deeper, weirder reality that science ignores. And I think that's the best stepping off point, to go that these things indicate there's something stranger happening than what the scientific establishment is happy to acknowledge within their very simple paradigms that they always like to contain everything. So I think that's the most valuable thing about strange stories and paranormal phenomena.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because like, if you think about it, like 100 years ago, we thought that mice came from like piles of rotten meat and that you could pull sickness out of people with leeches. Like, what we think is the top of technology and science now, 100 years from now, is going to look like clacking stones together in the back of a cave. It's not going to mean anything. So the only clues are in the abstractions of stories. The only clues are in the poetry of myth. The only clues are from things that were not meant to have guile. They were not meant to make anybody look smarter than anybody else. They were just like monkeys trying to figure out the world that they were living in. So if we can figure out those metaphors, I think there's a lot more real truth to them there than you can measure in a laboratory. Because like, who the fuck are we? Like, what is this? It's just a box with some electricity in it. That doesn't make us all knowing. It's not a thing. It's not a real thing. That's why I get behind 40 and ideology and as a general rule, because it leaves so much room there for this concept that the universe is super absurd and that we are not at all capable of understanding the totality of it. And that, in fact, it's really very arrogant of us to think that we have punched those tickets. Like, seriously, honestly, really? That's not a real thing. That's not a real thing. We still haven't figured out how to make clothes that don't ever have wrinkles in them. We don't know how to do that. This is a basic problem that everyone has. We still haven't solved it. You're trying to tell me we know for sure whether or not there's people in outer space. Okay, sure thing, buddy.
I almost can't think of a better end of the show than your little wrap up of reality right then, Heidi. I couldn't do it better myself.
Oh, great. Well, let's put a stamp on that then. Good. Cheers.
Well, I'll drink to that.
There's not much
Cheers
left.
The absurdity of the Fortean universe.
Well done.
And I guess that's keep it weird from me.
Yeah. Keep it weird.
Thank you for joining us tonight. If you're interested in checking out more episodes, you can find us at talkingweird.com. If you haven't already, please like the show on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Talking Weird Podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to Talking Weird. We're available on most podcast platforms and YouTube. And if you do enjoy the show, please leave us a review. Dean and I would really appreciate it. Until then, stay safe and keep it weird.